Hey, this is Bryan Gray from The Blamed and the Satire. I'm stoked to be here with Dan and Joe talking about Stavesacre on Discography Discussion.
You're listening to Discography Discussion, episode 257, Stavesacre, with Bryan Gray of The Blamed.
Yeah, we can have a separate episode where we break down what y'all did.
Hosted by Dan Terry.
Super rare, only released on cassette,
And Joseph Wren. Please tell me why you guys haven't covered Kill the Sarks yet. Presented by discussmetal.com. And if you're still waiting for gold and silver, then you are ready for this episode of Discography Discussion. I am Joe. That is Dan. Bryan Gray is here. Everybody's sick. What's going on, guys? We're talking about Stavesacre.
This is the whole reason I went to Furnace Fest.
Worth
just
it.
to see Stavesacre, huh?
Really was. Once I heard Mark on the Labeled podcast say this, there's a large chance to be the last time you ever see us. I was like already on the fence. You and I had talked about it, Dan, and then I was like, I'm going.
Yeah. I was had kind of the opposite. Whereas you were not sure if you were going for a really long time, I was sure I was going for a really long time, and then ended up not being able to.
Then your bumper fell off.
Yeah, let's go with that. Yeah, we'll say I didn't go because my bumper fell off. Yeah. Definitely one of my biggest regrets for last year, but yeah, I mean, I'm still stoked. I'm trying not to let it get me down, and I'll definitely try to make my way there next year, where I'm sure it's going to be an equally fascinating and once in a lifetime experience.
I'm looking forward to hearing who's playing.
Yeah.
Are they already talking about the next Furnace Fest?
They did pre-sale tickets on Black Friday. They've done a few events, like they kind of co-sponsored the Emery event in Kansas City. I just watched the Beloved live stream last night on their Facebook group.
Oh, I need to catch that. I never got to see Beloved live, and Dan's been shoving that album down everybody's throat for a long time.
Well, funny story about Beloved, and I'm sure I've told this before on the podcast. We were at Cornerstone the year they broke up, and I passed on seeing Beloved because at the time they were like one of the more up and coming bands. They'd had the record out for a little while, and they were strong. I'd seen them play. I saw them play with Zayo here in St. Louis, and then I went to Cornerstone, and there were so many big Cornerstone, much like Furnace Fest, is a lot of option paralysis. There's a lot of things that you're going to be really stoked about doing, but you're only going to get to do about half of them, And so I passed up Beloved, and I remember a buddy of mine being like, "Oh, but I really like him. I really want to go see him." I was like, "You can go see him, but they're not going anywhere. We'll see him again some other time." And then they announced the breakup a month later. I mean, it was just, yeah. You can ask my wife. I'm consistently wrong. If I ever tell you that I got a hunch about something, or that my intuition is telling me something, go ahead and go with the exact opposite of whatever it is that I have a hunch on, and you will probably be a millionaire by 30.
Yeah.
It's like that scene in Super Mario Brothers where Luigi says, "Turn left," and then Mario doesn't, and he says, "Perfect." He says, "You said go left." "Yeah, but I wanted you to go right, so I told you the opposite of what I wanted you to do."
Let's not even get into just saying the opposite of what you meant to say.
Trust me, I'm in a band. I tell everybody to be there 2 hours early, knowing they still won't make it on time. So
it's not that I'm upset. It's past experiences, guys, have taught me that I just need to over-exaggerate arrival times.
Yes.
We've had a drummer like that more than once, Dan.
Yes, we have. Speaking of music, the reason we are all assembled tonight is to talk about Stavesacre, because they're one of the most influential bands that I don't think a lot of people talk about as much anymore. And I think that's kind of a shame. Not that they're gone. I mean, obviously they just played a major festival, at least a major festival to us, just just a few months back now. Has it been that long?
Yeah, it's been months.
It's been a long time. But this is also probably one of the most requested episodes people have asked us to do. in the past few years. And I've always been kind of on the fence about it because I'm kind of weird about, like, you know, if I know that a discussion is going to be good and fun and something that I care about, I tend to just, for whatever reason, wait as long as humanly possible to get around to doing that episode. And I think a lot of it is just trying to compose what I want to say without sounding cheesy or weird.
Is this why we haven't done a Motorhead episode yet?
No, that's just because I don't want to listen to that many years worth of albums.
It's a lot of albums.
It is a lot. But for all those people that have held on this long, we are going to actually talk about this band tonight.
So you've never done a Stavesacre episode?
No, never.
Because I know you've mentioned to me before, sometimes you'll revisit a band, and I kept wondering and forgot to ask you if this was a revisit.
No, it's not a revisit. Although it's funny because sometimes when people ask me, like, "Oh, hey, have you ever talked about this band on the show?" A lot of the times I actually have to go check.
Yeah.
Because I can't remember a lot of the. I mean, we're going back. I think what episode number did you say this was, Joe? Like 257 or something like that.
That's right.
Yeah, that's a lot. So. But yeah, we definitely, I knew for a fact we'd never talked about these guys, and I think it's important. We hinted, I think I even said whenever we did the Crucified episode that I was gonna do it, or I was gonna, you know, you know, Stavesacre's next. You know, we're just gonna jump right in, and then, you know, we jumped right in like 3 years later.
Yeah,
that reminds me, we need to get Doug back on the show, because that was a great show, especially if I was sick. He could have talked the entire time, but I think he was just. I think Doug Van Pelt was just on the Labeled podcast.
It was a great conversation.
Well, if I continue to be sick or if my test results come back in a way I don't want them to come back, I'll have plenty of time to sit down and listen to it.
Yeah, it's worth the listen, for sure.
So.
Well, before Dan gets less satisfactory test results, I'm going to take this time to say thank you to everyone for listening to the podcast. Thank you for listening and for subscribing. If you are not a subscriber, then you can find everything Discography discussion at discussmetal.com. We are on Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, iHeartRadio. So if you have an Amazon Echo or a Google Home, you have no excuse. Ask it to play the latest episode of the Discography Discussion podcast, and it will. We're also on Facebook and on Twitter at Discuss Metal. Be sure to like, favorite, and subscribe. It really helps us out. It lets us know you're listening. And now Dan is going to tell us all about 5-star reviews.
Well, we do enjoy our 5-star reviews here on Discography Discussion. You guys want to leave us a review, tell us we're doing a good job, or tell us we're doing a bad job. I don't have to tell you to tell us that we're doing a bad job. Somebody will. You're just going to know to do that. It's a telepathic thing. But, you know, it does help us kind of know what you're looking for out of the show. And if there is something that we could be doing better, you know, feel free to let us know. There's a lot of ways you can reach out to us to let us know that as well, which I will go over in exquisite detail at the end of the show. So keep them coming. And, you know, always feel free to reach out. We are always receptive to hearing what you have to say.
Hey, Bryan.
Yes.
What's going on with the Blamed? What's going on with the Satire? What's going on with you, man?
The Blamed is just slowly finishing up our 2021 release. It's going to be 2022, but it still was done in 2021. You guys are actually going to be a part of the record, so we haven't got that far. I hate it now preemptively announcing, but can't wait to get your parts done.
Now all the listeners want to know what's coming. Do we want to spoil that here, or do we want to leave them in wondering?
Make them buy the record and find it themselves. That's the way you got to go.
Yeah, we can have a separate episode where we break down what y'all did.
There you go. We'll just post a YouTube video. I want to do one of those really weird ones where, like, it'll be me and Joe standing in front of a microphone, and it'll just be like, we're working on something.
Yeah, exactly. That'll be perfect.
And everybody will be all like, duh, you guys do a podcast. What is you in front of a microphone? How is that any different than any other day?
Exactly. The Satire, we actually are about done with. We're going to put out a cassette single. Yeah, just something similar to what Starflyer did last year. I totally stole it from them. It'll be a new song, and then the B-side will be this really cool demo of the song that we actually did at Steve Albini's studio. So,
oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so it'll be, but it's like the old lineup. I played drums on the old demo. It's not even remotely cool, except that it's kind of cool.
It'll be something that, you know, people will be. That's one of those types of things that you're going to put it out, people are going to buy it, and then, like, you know, 10 years later, you're going to be browsing eBay, and somebody's going to be all like, super rare, only released on cassette. You know, Like, it's so funny how that stuff is, and you're like looking over at a pile of them.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, we're only going to make, I think, like 50 or something.
Oh, okay.
Maybe a small run. Satire's not as big as the Blame, so it, but folks like it, so it'll be fun. And literally the whole thing is done except for my guitars, which is a rarity. So they're just waiting on me.
Well, I appreciate you taking time out of your night to procrastinate on that a little bit more.
No, no
with
problem.
us.
I don't know that I would have done it tonight, anyways. But I'm a Stavesacre fan and I'm a Discography discussion fan, so I was very thankful y'all invited me to be a part.
Absolutely. Well, and you have more, I don't want to say insider knowledge of the band, but you know more about things as they were happening than we do. Because I think the first album I ever heard by these guys was Speakeasy. I think that was their big.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, well, that was for a lot of people, I think that that was kind of their big breakthrough. That was whenever we were like, are these guys going to become a really, really huge band? Or, you know what I mean? It was definitely during that era. So I think that's when the most ears were on it. But I actually, I ended up getting Friction and Absolutes at Cornerstone one year on cassette. I still have the cassettes.
I mean, those records are mind-blowing.
Yeah, those are, it's weird too, because they don't sound like Speakeasy, which we'll get into.
Not at all, yeah.
And so, yeah, I remember being like kind of taken aback, like, oh, okay, so this is a totally different kind of deal. And I can't wait to see what the rest of their records. But at that time, I think whenever I got into them, there was just those 3 records. So, but yeah, a lot of diversity there in just 3 records, which on this show we very much appreciate, because I've listened to bands that have been around for 30 years that you put the first record on and then you put the newest record on and it's the same thing, which...
Yeah, I do that all the time.
It's not the worst thing you can do, especially if, you're the super fan and you're wanting to hear that thing your favorite band does.
Totally. That was the, whatever they call it, 1995, whatever the last record they put out. I mean, I don't want to rush into it and we'll get into it as we go, but I mean, that was everything you wanted to hear.
Oh yeah.
I think Bryan really wants to get going. Dan, what do you think?
No, yeah, that's cool. I'm the one slowing everybody down. I'm like, I'm in that weird position where I'm like, am I actually sick, or is it just talking about potentially being sick that is making me think that I'm sick? We'll find out by the end of this episode. Well, before we get going, I got some comments I need to read.
Wonderful comments.
We got a comment going all the way back to episode 137, Seven Dust, with
Morgan Rose.
From Henry B. Tyndall Jr. He goes, most highly underrated drummer ever in the most highly underrated band ever. NYE show in 2019 at Masquerade in Atlanta was one of my favorite of all time. Couple of things. Number one, that episode was, I go back and I listen to that, and it's one of those things that I can't believe even happened. Because we had Morgan Rose from Seven Dust on, and it was more like a therapy session than it was an actual interview. I don't even think we got around to talking about the Seven Dust albums. That's a band we need to probably revisit.
He talked for 2 hours. Yeah. Scott Bowling was there too, by the way.
Yeah, he was on his way to a Fozzy concert.
He went to the Fozzy concert.
He did. We watched him pay a bum $20 for parking.
Nice.
And the guy just took his $20 and walked off, and then just never came back. All that happens while we're having this interview with Morgan Rose. And that was also the last night I drank pumpkin beer. I haven't touched any of it since then, because just the thought of pumpkin in a drink, I won't drink a pumpkin beer or a pumpkin latte or anything. I am done with that flavor. But I will disagree a little bit. I mean, who thinks that Seven Dust is underrated? I thought they were a huge band.
Dan Terry, circa 2005.
Entirely possible. Lost Fiction on Patreon, in reference to our Ultraviolet by Misery Signals review, said, any chance you will cover the new Rivers of Nihil record? It's been my album of the year, and I'm dying to hear your feelings on this one. Yes, we will talk about the new record and all the other ones too, this year. So we'll definitely get there. They are on the list. They are in the rotation. I don't usually like to spoil what bands we're talking about, so I won't tell you the exact week it's coming out, but it is happening. So just hold on for anywhere between 1 week to 2 years.
How can people find out what week it's coming, Dan?
Oh, well, if you sign up for the Patreon, we tell you stuff like that. I'm real free and I'm real free and loose on the Patreon about stuff. So definitely check that out.
So Bryan, Tell me about Stavesacre.
Well, you guys, I think, know this, but the singer of The Blamed from Frail, Jeremy Moffat, left The Blamed to play drums for Stavesacre. And I was playing with Mortal before that, with Jeff from Stavesacre. And I lived at the Newman House, which was infamous in Southern California, with Mark. So when they were putting this band together, you were just really excited for it to come out.
I think one of the biggest things about this record is really, I'm sorry, Joe, I'm just jumping into it, but I think the thing that's interesting about this record is that, and we're talking about Friction from 1996, in case anybody doesn't know that.
Dan is not holding back.
I'm not. This record is so cool because, like, number one, I had no frame of reference for this whenever I first heard it, and this is like a lot of the stuff. As I said earlier, I heard Speakeasy first, which was more of just like a hard rock record. And I'm saying like, oh, just like I'm being dismissive of it. Trust me, I'm not. When we get to that record, I'll have a lot to say. But it's definitely a record that I remember whenever I got it. I say a record, but I had a cassette, and I sat there staring at the cover for the longest time, trying to figure out what it actually was. It's obviously just like a knife, like it's just a cutter, you know.
It's a razor, straight razor.
Straight razor, yeah. But me being a little kid that didn't have facial hair or anything, had no idea what it was. And it looked to me, for whatever reason, it's got this like wood finish on it.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was like a giant sausage for the longest time, because I'd be all like, you know, because people would be all like, oh yeah, like, you like that album Friction? I was like, is that the one that has the sausage on the cover?
Yeah.
And then somebody carefully sat me down and explained to me what a huge idiot I was. And I was like, oh, yeah, okay, yeah. Now that I'm actually looking at it with my eyes, yeah, I can definitely see it's not a sausage. Has nothing to do with the record. So what happens whenever you take like 90s alternative rock and mix it with like 90s hardcore?
You get A Thought Crushed My Mind.
Yeah.
You get that a little bit later, yeah.
Well, and if I could interject, I'm going to use the word timestamp here, but you have to imagine, this is probably before y'all's time, they came on the scene at Cornerstone that year. Argyle Park was headlining the encore stage.
Nice.
And Argyle Park brought Stavesacre out to play the 3 songs from their 3-song independent cassette demo.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I mean, we all had that cassette. It was passed around. It was a major deal to have that tape, because Friction didn't probably come out for a while after that. I mean, and it was just, you know, you were waiting. I mean, going further back to, let's say, the Crucified. So you have 2 members of the Crucified in this thing. The bassist of Focused. I mean, you've been waiting for Mark Solomon to sing on a heavy music release.
Right.
Then the next things you're getting over the years, all of a sudden there's Mark Solomon singing on the Mortal album, Fathom. Right. Then he sings on XL and DVD. And then he sings on Focus, Bow.
Yeah.
Then he sings on the acoustic song on the Blamed album. Not a testimony to heavy music, but even for me, that was watching Mark starting to get more into my melody. You know, and I don't mean to throw my own band in there, but we're all part of the scene. But think about, it wasn't released yet, but it was done. Have you ever heard the Crucified's greatest hits or their box set?
Yeah.
And now they have the song Straining Life. Mm-hmm. And Mark singing melodic like he would in Stavesacre for the first time on Straining Life. Probably even a little bit in Mindbender.
Yeah. So yeah, that's interesting. I never even thought about that.
Well, I was there.
Yeah.
So you watch the progression. And then when Stavesacre hits with this 3-song demo, it's like, I think Trainwreck was the first song on it. So it hits you running, and then this aggressive, it's heavy. And then there's Mark Solomon from the Crucified.
Singing.
Yes. but it really wasn't that different, because not like Mark was a screamer. He was just always singing fast. Now he's singing slow and melodic. So you didn't have to try to memorize how were you ever going to sing all those lyrics in your image, you know, or whatever.
Did the demo have the same early Tool vibes that this record has sometimes? It's
3 songs from the record.
So that's a yes.
Yeah.
I wish I could have heard that.
I'm looking at it on Discogs right now, and it says it was Trainwreck, At the Moment, and Suffocate Me were the 3 songs.
Okay. So yeah, that all transferred over.
All right. So throw that Bob Marley wannabe motherfucker out of here.
Yeah, exactly. When you throw that, throwing out the timestamp for it again, think about that was when Bruce first sang for Live and Sacrifice a year or so later. They just dropped it in on cassette. you were still in that era where a 3-song Stavesacre tape at Cornerstone was a game changer.
Right. Wow. That's interesting. And I'm saying that like weird. I'm not saying like, oh, that's cool, real cool, let's move on. No, I'm not saying like that. I just, whenever I think about it, it's weird whenever you come in, you kind of come to the party late, and you're catching up on stuff, because that's what I did a lot whenever I started kind of getting into heavier music, and especially like heavier Christian music when I was younger. I didn't know how to put the pieces together, you know? Yeah. And I'm still, there's a lot of the stuff that I still don't always completely understand how all the lines connect. And that's, I mean, a lot of the conversations that we've had and a lot of the conversations I've had with other people about these things, it does come from a place of genuine curiosity. Because when I first heard, because I heard Stavesacre before I heard The Crucified.
Yeah. You know? Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird sort of perspective to have. So whenever I went back and I was like, oh, okay, well, it's the same singer from this band. I like this band. I'm gonna go check out, you know, his old band, you know, and I didn't like it because it was different, you know. And I think at that time too, I did appreciate more melodic singers to what he was doing in The Crucified. And you know, and now as a metalhead for years and years and years, I think, you know, I can appreciate The Crucified a lot more as far as that aggressiveness goes.
Sure. Well, but your story is most people's.
Yeah.
Most folks. I mean, if you even were to crunch numbers, Stavesacre probably outsold The Crucified like 10-1.
Right.
But they don't have the same. I don't say they don't, but I think it's been probably the bane of Mark's existence. The idea of how many people, The Crucified will never die, and there's a lot of people that moved on from Stavesacre.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's interesting too that this record hit in such a way. This was my first hint that like, you know, that this type of like underground music was just as good as the stuff that was mainstream, because, you know, obviously there's that whole like, mostly idiots say this, but like, oh yeah, Christian rock music is always just, you know, this or that or this or this, and it can't be innovative and it can't be cool and it can't be relevant and all that stuff. And records like this, you know, in 1996 fly in the face of that.
No, exactly.
In such a profound way.
But they also like, I'm just doing my math while we're talking, and I don't mean to take over if I'm being too much, let me know. But I mean, Friction, they hired a massive producer for it. Brian Karlstrom was a huge deal in 96.
Yeah.
I think
you can hear it too.
Yeah, I think he had worked on the Orange 9mm records, maybe an Alice in Chains record. He was like the fifth Beatle with that band to an extent. And you can hear it when he stopped working with them. But like that, you know, when you think of Friction, like you said, coming on the scene, feeling like it could keep up with what was in the mainstream, it was the mainstream. I mean, that was when you think of Tooth and Nail dropping in a record produced by Brian Karlstrom, and maybe that next year was the MXPX record produced by the dude from the Descendants or whatever. I mean, Bill Stevenson or whatever they did. I mean, those were the precursors. The rest of us were still at the green room with Bob Moon or whoever, which are great engineers. You still had Starflyer with the guys from Mortal, Sometimes Sunday with the Andy Prickett, and I don't even remember who engineered that record, probably Gene Eugene. But you just... Then all of a sudden you were getting into Stavesacre Friction, just like you said.
Yeah.
It's weird to hear the 90s mainstream influences. And you mentioned they have the personnel to back up some of those cosmetic choices. When I listened to this record, I really enjoyed it because I'm not just hearing that old school Tool sound or that 90s hardcore sound. There's Pearl Jam in this.
Yep.
There's Hum in this. All the music that we listen to on that alternative radio station that used to actually play alternative music.
Oh, yeah.
So if you're a fan of that rock, it's all here. Everything you want. And this is in 96, where we were hinting at nu metal and surviving Europop.
Oh, yeah.
I still like Europop sometimes.
No, I do too. I mean, exactly. But, you know, you think of where the 90s was going. I mean, I don't mean to talk about my own band, but we were having a discussion probably months ago about the Blame 21 record. Jim, the drummer, and I were the originals. And I was telling him, I'm like, go listen to the Offspring record from that same year. The drum tones are exactly the same. And he was like, no, they're not. I'm like, no, they really are. But the musician caliper, I'm not that guitar player or that singer, so it'll never be as good. But sonically, there's something there that you would never know that's 1994.
I feel like this is a conversation Dan and I have had more than once.
Yeah. But then, like you said, Stavesacre was that refresher. They were even going outside of that as you were moving out of that early 90s sound.
Well, yeah, and you had also, Mark's. I don't have anything but good things to say about Mark's singing, because I know that I've listened to the band around people before, and like for whatever reason his voice rubbed them the wrong way, and I don't hang out with those people anymore.
Yeah.
But it is kind of one of those things where he has such an original voice, and he's one of the few singers in that kind of came from this scene that you can pick him out of a crowd immediately.
Big time.
Just from the way he sounds. Like you could be walking around. You could be walking around a big festival and just hear the band playing, off in the distance, and then, and know exactly what you're getting into. Hopefully they're not on their last song, But yeah, this record kind of blew my mind. And I was actually listening to, this is the same cassette tape haul that I got Frail by The Blamed in. And, and so that was kind of my first experience with, like, I remember listening to Friction and then listening to Frail, and I'm not trying to make a direct comparison to those two records, but I remember being like, okay, so this is like the more socially, like, I remember holding up Friction and holding up Frail and being like, with Friction being like, this is the more socially acceptable version of this.
Yeah.
And I think it's cool because, like, I mean, there's even it's kind of a testament to what you're saying too about, kind of coming from the same scene, because there's songs on Frail that kind of remind me of Stavesacre songs, not like direct copies or necessarily even something that's conscious, but just kind of the approach to writing melodic songs that were still heavy and powerful.
Yeah, the song Breeze on Frail is very Stavesacre.
Yeah.
And now we weren't even going for that, to be honest. I think I had learned to play that kind of music in Mortal.
Yeah.
So for me, there was some songs in Mortal that were like that song, But fun fact, Mark Solomon sang on Breeze, and Jeremy cut his vocals, and it didn't make the cut.
Oh, no. That would have been interesting. We'd have been having a totally different conversation at that point, because I would have drawn the wrong conclusion that, this must have been why Mark went and did Stavesacre, because it's like, it has to have been some sort of influence of or whatever. You make those weird connections in your mind, and then years later, you're like, yeah, no, none of that was intentional.
No, it wasn't. He wanted to do melodic, though. Everybody knew that. When he sang on the Ballad of the Blamed with me, that was like my work here is done. I can go home now, as far as my music career. And then he did something different out of the box. And I just remember loving it, but I'm the music nerd that loves everything, probably like you guys,
Yeah. If it jams, it jams. Sort of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sort of thing. Yep.
Speaking of absolutes, 1997.
That was good, Joe. That was good.
Well, I mean, I'll help you segue into absolute. Just new drummer. That was a game changer in itself. Like, I mean, we all knew Sam was amazing from his work with Scaterd Few and Savior Machine, but like hearing him on absolutes was just like, wow.
This is one of the best opening tracks I think I've heard on a rock record, that it like contains elements of almost everything else that you're going to hear, throughout the experience. But I think one of the biggest things was that, like, I wish that I had listened to these as they came out, because there's something really fun about the nervousness of a band that put out a record that you love, like Friction, and then they're putting out a next record and you're like excited because you love the band and you want to hear what they're going to put out. But also a little bit of dread of like, what if this sucks? It's like going to see a Star Wars movie these days, I'm excited, but it could also be terrible. But then, like, the opening song, Shiv, just jumps in there. And you're like, okay, everything's fine. I'm good. I'm going to have a great time.
I bought the CD, and I remember it didn't disappoint. You were just like, wow, this is so good.
I'm just glad the vibe is still there. It's 1997. I'd never heard this record before this week, and I'm still getting that alternative rock, alternative hardcore influence. It's melodic, it's heavy, it's got the groove. I can hear the hum in it, and I can hear the bands that will be playing a version of this style in a few years. So it's a really nice sweet spot for me because, yeah, it's where everything came from. It clearly influenced more bands than we've talked about, and it just sounds good. It's not trying to be shred your throat hardcore. It's enjoyable. Sorry, Dan. Sometimes shred the throat is not a good idea.
I mean, teach their own. But no, yeah, this thing absolutely, as a second record or as a sophomore record, that's what music reviewers say, right? On their sophomore record, but this absolutely is an example of a band doing kind of the same thing that they did before, but better, and that's not discounting the first record as being a cult classic to some people, because even I had a lot of trouble deciding which one I liked more whenever I was listening to it for the show. And then I ultimately realized that I didn't have to pick which one I liked more because I have both of them, so I can just listen to both of them and be fine. But I think this record absolutely ups the ante. I think Mark on the first record maybe struggled a little bit with being a hardcore singer singing in a melodic band. Don't get me wrong, he has some amazing melodies in the first record, but on this one it's much more refined and it's much more you can tell that he's a lot more confident in his vocal delivery on this one.
Well, you can just tell they've been being a band,
right?
Like, Friction, I mean, I can't tell when I hear it, but they were learning to be a band. At this point, they've toured now, played shows. Jeremy left the band. They got a professional drummer. I mean, These are all big deal things. Right. I always say, I wish I could hear Friction with Sam the drummer on it because those songs live are insane. I mean, I'm a drummer guy, not a drummer, but for me, the drummer can make or break the band. And Jeremy did great on the first album, but comparatively, Sam did phenomenal on it.
The pocket matters, man. The groove comes first. And I know it's not the most punk rock thing to say, but there's a reason why some of the most successful and some of the most interesting bands, and they're not always the same thing, are fun to listen to.
Well, and Dirk is such a presence in this band. That bass vibe he does, I've never really heard anywhere else. So to hear Dirk and Sam be able to really connect and glue, just like you call it, the pocket together, it's like crazy. And the only thing I'd say about this record is my favorite song is Wither a Sin.
Oh, yeah.
But I've always loved Jeff Blue's vocals. So the idea that he sings lead on the first part was always just magical for me. And I thought about this, Dan, when you were just saying is about the vocals is, I think one thing to give credit to also with these records was how important Mark's lyrics were.
Oh, yeah.
Like all of a sudden coming into Friction and Absolutes, I mean, I'm getting lyrical content because Mark's an amazing, brilliant writer. So now all of a sudden the idea that I'm not just hearing Mark be pissed off about the world and Christianity on the Crucified. I'm now getting this depth from him that we all know he does. And it just, I don't read lyrics. I'm not a vocal guy, but I read his.
Yeah. It's deep and it's thought provoking to the point where I think a lot of lyricists, myself included, I always struggled with trying to be direct and honest, but also to add in a little bit of that art flair, that sort of masterpiece of masterpiece isn't a good word, but just, I don't know, just to have an artfulness, a poeticness to what I'm saying. And Mark is probably one of the best at being poetic, but also direct, and it not be so direct that it's like, I was walking down the street and then a car stopped in front of me and then I also stopped walking, because there's a lot of bands.
And he waved me over.
Yeah. I think we just wrote the next Stavesacre song. No, but anyway, the thing is that like he is you may not necessarily always know, because I struggled to kind of figure out like some of those concepts were so deep that I think as a high school kid first checking the band out at first, a lot of it went way over my head.
Yeah, I was in my 20s, so I was ready for it.
Right. I'm ready. Let's go.
Yeah. But I mean, as a writer, and I'm not a writer, but I wish I had 5% of what Mark can put into a song with lyrics.
Oh, yeah. And, a good melody is a good melody, but man, once you listen to one of these songs and you connect with what he's saying, that's the experience that every band tries to create, and very few actually are able to pull it off.
Yeah. The connection is amazing.
Are we ready for Speakeasy?
Oh, I'm ready for Speakeasy.
1999.
This is one of those weird situations where I always say this. I say this all the time. So it's like when I say something's a weird situation, is it really weird? Because I bring it up all the time about how weird it is. Being very self-aware on this episode. But Speakeasy is obviously like the big push record because what every band this is what every band needs to do. Okay, just like make sure you guys are writing this down. Establish what you are, which they did very, very masterfully on their first two records.
We're very melodic.
Establish who you are. Establish sort of an expectation in people's minds for what you're going to get out of a record.
It's going to be alternative rock from the 90s.
Right. Well, but before that, it was also more like there were multiple influences. It was a blender. It was a combination of alternative rock, but also having a little bit of that hardcore vibe, but like not so hardcore that rock fans would like run away screaming, So like.
But wouldn't it be safe to say that they were also on the edge very early on with post-hardcore?
Oh yeah, 100%.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, that's. I'm glad you brought that up because what they've done on Speakeasy is they've taken those expectations. They meet those expectations. I don't think there's any fans of the band that listen to Speakeasy and it's like, oh, these guys suck now. But this is where they introduced the most change sound wise and became more of that alternative rock band that people would actually buy a record from. Is the only nice way to say it. You've got more, you've got what I would consider to be kind of a power single with Sundown Motel. You've got kind of all of the elements of a band that's about to go major.
That was the trajectory.
Yeah.
I was only, because I wasn't on Tooth and Nail at this point. I was only this much behind the scenes, and they were expecting Stavesacre to just explode.
Yeah, and I think that what's funny about Speakeasy, and I've gone on, I say this a lot, and it has no basis, but I feel like if Speakeasy had come out in 1997, they would have become one of the biggest bands, out there. And whenever I say that, I just want to establish that obviously Mark and the boys have sold more records than I will ever sell in my life. Those who can't criticize on the internet. But yeah, this was the first one, I believe, the first record that charted.
I think so too. This is most of my friends would say this is their Stavesacre record.
Yeah. This was a lot of people's introduction to the band, and mine as well. And I think Mark even talks about it in his book too, that like he remembers after that record came out, and I'm paraphrasing, it's been like 5 years since I read that book. But he said something along the lines of like, this is when that record came out, it was the first time people started calling him Mark from Stavesacre.
It's true.
That it was his main thing, and people wanted to talk about Speakeasy with him and talk about the lyrics and stuff. And I'm sure it was a whole bunch of people being all like, so which songs are actually about God and which ones are not, because I was a youth group kid back then. I know how it goes.
Even this record, it still came out in peaks of Christian music. And that was where, as we go forward with it, but I mean, this record was also the departure of Jeff Ballou. Like Jeff, I think, participated on this record and wrote, but this was his like on the way out.
Right.
So it was, I remember I could tell that when I listened to it. Of course, when I got the record, I'm a harder music guy, so I preferred the first two. But that being said, I would listen to this record on the regular, sing along. Experiencing these songs live was just, this record's great, but it doesn't even hold a candle to what that live show was.
Oh, yeah.
I've seen.
Do you think it was an exercise in, we looked at the charts, we talked to the radio stations that play your songs sometimes, and they say melodic is where it's at. Hardcore was becoming more hardcore, more extreme. Nu metal was becoming popular. Did somebody sit down with the band and just do the record label thing? We think if you guys go full melodic, full radio single, we've got a hit, we can sell it. Yeah, this would have been the late 90s where you couldn't necessarily make it on your own yet. So somebody had to be pushing a little bit, I think.
I feel like it was Ryan taking over some of the songwriting. Now, I don't know this. This is just me speculating. But at that point, Ryan Denny had come in from Plank Eye. Ryan and I were on the first Help Us Amongst Friends comp together in a quicksand sounding band called Mend with Dano from Unashamed.
Did not know that.
Yeah. So seeing Ryan go into this role felt very natural. Seeing Ryan and the band get more melodic it felt natural. All of it did. And they were trying to make it. So that one danger when you're in that world is you want to make sure you're writing, authentic music, authenticity versus paychecks.
Right.
Because those songs that equal paychecks never work. I mean, unless you're Taylor Swift or country music.
Right. Well, and I was going to say that too. Based on like how I feel about the record, I'm trying not to be biased about it. But I think that it wasn't necessarily a push. I think the push was was more self-motivated in the sense of like, we can take this to the next level. But like, we've all heard, those bands that literally change overnight and suddenly they go from being complex and deep to very, very simple. And it's like really noticeable. Whereas with Speakeasy, this is a Stavesacre record. Some people would say it's the Stavesacre record.
Most people would, yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that all of the elements are there that have always been there. I think you've got extremely insightful lyrics. You've got extremely hard-hitting. I say hard-hitting and not in the heaviness scale, but hard-hitting songs that stick with people, songs that you remember, the songs that will stick with you, for years after you hear the record. I think this was all done 100% sincere, but also with the intention of, let's become that band people are here to see. Yeah. And I think they pulled that off brilliantly here. This record definitely hit me at the right time, because I think that if I had heard it whenever I was predominantly a heavy music fan, I would have been like, yeah, this record's great, but the first two are better. That's kind of but this just hit me at that right time when I still wasn't sure what kind of music I liked yet. Yeah.
And live, it all translated though. When you saw this tour and they're playing Speakeasy, Absolutes, Friction, there's no lines dividing the songs. It felt very fluent or flowing or whatever you want to call it. It was
cohesive. Yeah.
Yes, cohesive.
Yeah, 100%. And this record was really, the biggest deal, because I remember a buddy of mine, not that buddy, but was basically like trying to show me Christian rock bands, because I had just kind of gotten into that sort of culture, and he showed me Speakeasy, but then like he showed me a whole bunch of other Christian rock records, and like, yeah, he should have showed me Speakeasy last, because I would have actually given those other bands he showed me a chance.
Yeah,
because I was like, well, this is clearly like, this is close enough to the kind of music that I actually like, and it's not even close. Like all these other bands, it's like rock, but then they like start rapping, but like they're not great at rapping. They're okay at the rock part, but they're not great at the rapping part, or this or that. I don't even remember what half of those bands were, and I won't mention them even if I do, because I'm sure.
Godcore.com.
Yeah, I remember Godcore.com. That was the site. But yeah, so obviously Speakeasy, in my opinion, 10 out of 10. It is my favorite Stavesacre record, because I think it's the best all around. It's sandwiched right there in the middle of the discography, and it's a trajectory that they do stay on for a little while. The results are good. I don't think, spoilers, I don't think this band has a bad record, and I'm not even being a fanboy. I tried really hard to pick these records apart and find things wrong with them, or have some sort of contradicting opinion, because it's no secret that if you listen to this podcast and I say a whole bunch of negative things about a band, you're going to say that's a better episode than the one, where I'm like, no, trust me, this is great, all of it. I think the only band I get away with being 100% positive on is Zao, you know, but yeah, no, I think that this record is a 10 out of 10. And so to say that I was super, super stoked for I guess we're going to call this the self-titled that comes out.
The Nitro release.
Yeah, the Nitro release. Yeah,
I think it's how most people used to refer to it back in the day.
Yeah.
Because it was where they thought they were going to be mainstream.
Right. Yeah, there was this was the result of all the hard work to get here. And it actually, Joe, do you want to give this one a shot?
2002, stylized Stavesacre.
So I don't know how to read those pronunciation keys. So a little bit more about me. I know that's why you guys are all. I know that's why you guys are all here, right?
Exactly. That's why I'm here.
I don't know how to read these, right? So I never know how to pronounce anything. That never helps me at all. And so I called this band for the better part of 9 years. Hear me out, Stavesacre. And I would tell people that, and be all like, yeah, they're like, oh, who's some of your favorite bands? And I'd be like, I like Zao and Living Sacrifice and Stavesacre. And they'd be all like, who? And I'm like, Stavesacre. And I'm like, Speakeasy, Sundown Hotel,
Oh, you meant Stavesacre.
No, but people would just roll with it. They wouldn't correct me. I want to be corrected. That's why we ask you to email us and leave us feedback on things, because if we're wrong about something, I want to know about it. Yeah.
Did you guys ever look up what it means? The poisonous flower.
That makes a lot of sense.
That's
full of useless
pretty deep.
No, that's actually answers most of my questions. Thank you.
I believe Jeff Ballou told me the scene in Braveheart when William Wallace, a little kid, and his father dies or something, and the little girl runs up and hands him the flower. That's Stavesacre.
Okay. Wow.
Thank God he didn't eat the flower.
Yeah, I think
we'd have had a completely different movie.
We used to make fun of them being the Irish weed. So
let's talk about this record for a second.
It's a tough one because of the Sonics.
Because of the songs?
No, the Sonics.
The Sonics. Okay.
It was their first departure from, I believe, Brian Karlstrom.
I think it's interesting. Yeah, and I get what you're saying with that, because this is where it could be argued. This is where suddenly the opening, like the opening riff on the first song, Witch Trial, is like good, but sound-wise, it sounds like a lot of rock from 2002. And I know that's the goal, and I know that they're, but I don't think it's ever been the goal of this band to sound like anyone else, at least not directly. But yeah, the Sonics are kind of one of those. It's really the only thing, because I think the material is very strong.
I always preferred the 3 songs from the record on the Dennis and Mars split.
Oh, okay.
Because that was my intro to it, was they did that split with Dennis and Mars.
Yeah.
3 of the songs, different engineer, and I just always preferred the version on those.
Yeah.
And when it went into the actual Nitro version, it was just darker, muddier, and not dogging on it. Those are their words to an extent as well. They don't like this way the record sounds.
Mud is exactly what this record sounds like to me. Yet, cosmetically, the guitars are mixed a little bit thicker, but then the drums still have that thin 2 mics in the room sound that you got with a lot of underground alternative bands, especially. So it fits in the Stavesacre discography, but somebody wanted to do something with this. And the reason I think it sounds muddy is because it sounds like they backed off on something. Somebody had a really cool creative design for what this album sounded like. And then somebody sent it to the mastering engineer and said, that's not going to work for the radio. We need to back that down. And then nobody questioned it, or the band didn't have a say. It just sounds like something's missing. It sounds like if you remastered it, we'd get a different audible experience, because right now it feels dynamically lacking. And I don't think you can say that for the previous records.
Yeah, well, the 5th Beatles gone.
Right. Your guy, your mate, your go-to guy is no longer there. It's like you listening to Discography discussion that I produced and edited or whatever. It's going to be, it might be similar enough for like it to be passable, but it's not going to be. No, it wouldn't be. It would not.
Hosted a Discography discussion show.
There you go.
But that was where I heard it right away. Was I knew that Brian didn't work on the record, and it was audible to me. Jeff Ballou's now officially gone. Neil from Stairwell, I think.
Yeah.
Neil's now in, phenomenal guitar player. So there's this energy that Neil brings, but it just didn't capture it. And I don't like dogging records because I own this record and listen to it. But if I had to pick, I'll go to those 3 Dennis and Marr split songs first.
Sure. Yeah, I think that it's more, and it's not necessarily that it's a bad, I don't think it's a bad record at all. I like the record, but I think that as far as the sound goes, similar to kind of what Joe was saying, I think it was a kind of a marketability thing too, because I remember when Speakeasy was being marketed, it was just being marketed as rock, maybe even alternative rock. You could still kind of say alternative rock as long as you were in the 90s, even if it's 1999, everybody's going to still kind of know what you mean. This record, I felt, was marketed more as a like hard rock, almost like new metal type of record. It's not that kind of record, but I think they were trying to grab those fans, because you look at everything else that's going on in 1999 in, you know, Christian rock, especially. You had your Project 86s and your PODs and stuff that were just starting to become like noticed.
But Stavesacre was playing with those bands.
Oh, yeah.
And they fast forward to Nitro. They're now jumping in with like the Warped Tour culture.
Yeah.
And does it stick?
Yeah. And I think it doesn't, I don't think it works here. It may have worked for the time, because I don't know how well this record did. I'm going to assume it didn't do well at all, like most of my collection. But yeah, I think that they're pushing, you know, it's like pushing it into this more mainstream audience, but then also trying to add this sort of like faux we're harder than we actually are element to it.
Sure, well,
that I don't think the band did, but I think just the way it was produced and the way it was marketed was that way.
It was that first lesson a lot of bands saw with Jumpin' Ship, also from Tooth and Nail, where you had Brandon Ebel putting his money where his mouth is, and you could jump to Nitro and you're a small fish in a big pond at that point.
Right.
And now you've lost marketing to your primary audience, which is, I mean, they had done tours with the Supertones, Project 86, Living Sacrifice.
Yeah.
So now we're pushing you to, what, Pennywise fans?
And they're all standing there watching you with their arms crossed like, okay, yeah, I mean, you know, I'm sure there were plenty of people that were like, oh, this is really cool. But I think there is something about, like, there is something to be said about kind of staying in your scene to the degree of there being a buzz about your band that is always there as long as your band continues to exist in some capacity. Interrupt me if this doesn't make any sense, but like, I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, whenever you go into that bigger pond like that, and them not marketing you towards your primary audience is really dumb. I think labels have gotten better about that over time, of being like, don't think of it as this band is leaving this market as much as we as a label are joining this market.
Yeah. Well, I think right around the same time, Brandon put out the compilation, the greatest hits thing or whatever.
Yeah.
And I actually think the songs from the split with Dennis and Mars might have even been on that. I'm trying to look it up, the collection or whatever, right? Collective.
Yeah, Collective.
Yeah. Those two of those songs that ended up on the Nitro release are on Collective. And I believe Collective, if you were to break down the numbers, followed Stavesacre's trajectory from Speakeasy, but then Nitro didn't even have a way to, I mean, it's pre-internet.
Right, they can't track that.
Yeah, so how are you going to get your fans to hear about this record? Your Open Nitro takes out an ad in HM Magazine or where? I mean, I'm alternative press. I don't know that. I mean, the one thing I think that was also the bitter pill to swallow was realizing, Stavesacre really is, it's a Christian band with a Christian audience. That's the demographic. We're trying to get out of that, which is great. But these folks that are loyal to your band, they don't know how to follow you. You know, I think I remember hearing of them doing like a bar tour after that, or a mainstream venue tour, whatever. And they had got a lot of shows with like 20 people at it.
Yeah.
And it was when they would go to the Christian venues and play that it would be 1,000, you know, whatever.
Yeah, you go to Cornerstone and there's like people backed all the way out of the tent, you know.
Yeah, at that point they're on main stage.
Right.
You know, so, but you're going from main stage to your normal Nitro culture. It's not the same.
No. Yeah, that part of it sucks. I do think that the record is strong on its own merits.
Totally.
But it is one of those, you know, because it's not like they just stopped being the same band, overnight or anything like that. But I definitely think I've already said this, but I definitely prefer Speakeasy over it. But I do like both of these records for that era of the band.
Yeah.
Just because it's like two sides of a coin for me.
2006. How to Live with a Curse. You pick up your chainsaw and you get the job done. Wait, that's a different game.
Yep.
I actually love How to Live with a Curse. And I think, though, the title is unfortunately very prophetic to just the scene at the time. The curse was they were a Christian band and they tried to get out of it and it didn't work. It was the same thing with this label that put this out. I don't remember what it's called or if I could pronounce it anyways, but I think this record didn't even get an ounce of push. It was like the forgotten Stavesacre record.
I think that's unfortunate because Stavesacre, the record, came out in 2002. I wonder if it was not received well because it wasn't satellite by POD.
Well, that was every record that came out after that. Yeah.
But this one was in the market theoretically, right?
That's the things I don't think it existed.
So now you have How to Live with the Curse, which has a very dark sounding name with a very normal for 2006 album cover. And then the songs are Stavesacre songs.
But they're killer.
Oh my God.
I wish this record came out 5 years before.
We're on tooth and nail. Let's just call it like it is.
Absolutely.
If this record came out in whatever year this is, 2006, on tooth and nail, we would have a different record.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, as far as response, sales, vibe, I mean, this record is perfect, except for that it doesn't exist to most of their fans.
Yeah, this is like the comeback album that you never knew happened, And it's not necessarily a comeback from anything in the sense of like, the band was gone for 20 years, and then comes back or anything like that. But it's like, if you were a fan and if you were holding on to every word, and then this record comes out on a label that you probably don't listen to if you're a fan of the old records, it comes out in a scene that really, I'm trying to think of 2006. We're still, as far as I know, we're still pre-social media here.
Social media was breaking before that.
Yeah, because I do feel like that wouldn't have been the avenue to get word around. Because nowadays, a band like Stavesacre can get the word out. People went on social media. They said what their preferences were. They start following band pages. The promotion is so great. In 2006, we're still right before you can do that.
Well, my interpretation would be 2006. The Devil Wears Prada can drop a MySpace page and sell 10 to 80,000 records.
True.
And then Stavesacre, their demographic is all dads. And they're making sure their kids aren't looking at bad things on MySpace and have no idea that Stavesacre is even there.
Right. Yeah. It's funny you say that. When I was listening to Stavesacre for this episode, when I work, they're weird about headphones at work. At first, they let us wear our headphones when we work. And then they were like, no, you can only have one earbud in. And I'm a music nerd, so that's not acceptable to only listen to one earbud while I'm at work. So I listened to a DeWalt speaker that I got with a whole bunch of tools from when I used to do construction type work. And so I just started listening to my music out loud, respectfully, but listening to it out loud. And I think I was in the middle of Absolutes, and somebody came up to me and they're like, hey, can you turn your dad rock off? And I was like, Dad Rock, I'll have you know, this band is, and I went into the whole thing. But I mean, it's criminal because of how good this record is. And really, a lot of the complaints that I had from the Nitro release are alleviated here.
Remedied 100%.
It's a straight up course correction, and it's I don't know, I don't even know what to do with it because it is one of my favorite records by the band, but I never hear anybody talking about it. I bet people that look, because our audience is also a lot of dads. I almost wonder if we're doing this episode, people are gonna be like, oh, they're either gonna be like, I need to go listen to that again, or they're gonna be like, wait, what?
Yeah. Well, because thank God for unoriginal vinyl.
Yes.
Pushing the Speakeasy. I mean, they didn't get enough credit from us yet, but their Speakeasy release was very helpful. I don't remember if they were the final release, but they released How to Live with a Curse on vinyl the last few years. And I can't remember if that was unoriginal, so Tim, sorry if it's you. But I know that those came out consecutively, and that was following the last record, the whatever, 1995. There was a train wreck, no pun intended, with its final release, crowdfunding, all that stuff. So I think the reason I bring that up is I think a lot of people did find this record based on the vinyl re-release.
Right. Found it later on. Yeah.
Yeah, because it got some buzz. I am one of those people. I knew this record existed and could never find it as a young person. And then it wasn't even on the streaming for a long time. I believe this was recently added.
I think I just found it at a record store because I did that. I don't do it as much anymore nowadays, but I used to just go to record stores and, we all do this. You just go through every single CD that they have for sale. And if a band name that you recognize is in there, you just buy it, and that's how I ended up getting this record. And I guess I never really gave a lot of thought to it as far as I think it was only like $2. A lot of the records that I was interested were in there. But yeah, I was like, great. And this probably was like 2007, 2008, sometime around there. But yeah, it's not exactly the type of ringing endorsement of oh yeah, check it. None of us knew about it when it really would have been most crucial for us to know about it.
Yeah. But again, I think that it just didn't it disappeared. I mean, I don't want to tell the story because I don't know it that well, but I believe both this and the Nitro, that's another just tragedy within itself, is that they worked hard on these records. They worked hard to get out of the Christian market into the mainstream. You could probably find a podcast with Mark about it, but then they put out these 2 records that they weren't shelved, but they weren't pushed either.
Yeah.
And that's almost worse if you're on a major label or you have an agreement with a label and all they do is press it and then forget that they need to keep the rest of the bargain up. So now you're floundering because your record is sitting on a shelf somewhere not getting pushed.
And it's your fault.
Yeah.
That's the side in big business. If only Stavesacre had, and that's not really fair because they did, that just, like we said, of being the big giant Marvel what if. Can you imagine if both these records came out on Tooth and Nail? And that's the Nitro mix, which again, I'm quoting the band. They don't like the mix on that record. The Nitro mix being what it is, I still think that record, their fans are so loyal they would have bought it.
Oh, yeah.
And complained about it, but bought it and loved it. Mark did a great job.
Bought the next one, yeah.
And so that's where, that was, again, for all of us in the scene, seeing how MXPX, no problem. Stavesacre didn't have the same thing. Same time.
Yeah. I think a lot of that too, because when I look at this band, I see a lot of bubbles bursting at the wrong moments. Friction and Absolutes and even Speakeasy. Speakeasy, as successful of a record as it was still on the tail end of that sort of kind of music being popular. And then so they kind of move into this with the Nitro release almost in this sort of faux heavier direction or whatever. But then suddenly there's no demand for that type of music in 2002. Everybody's gone punk. This is punk's moment to shine.
Well, at that point, Project 86 was probably a little bit dead.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Stavesacre is the same demographic to an extent.
Yeah, that's sort of what we used to call just old-fashioned hard rock stuff.
Yeah.
Where we didn't have labels for everything. It was a hardcore, post-hardcore, technical, progressive, aggro, industrial influenced, whatever. We just we called actually when we were younger, we called bands like Project 86 metal bands. Because that was our only point of reference.
Some of us did.
Yeah, they were heavy.
They were. Yeah, they're a heavy band. And I think with Stavesacre, it's people whose introduction to music is something like the Devil Wears Prada in the mid to late 2000s.
Well, the MySpace culture, even Cornerstone, I saw it. Devil Wears Prada's playing generator stages by the sides of the road, but they've got probably 500,000 listens on MySpace.
Yep, yeah. And I remember back then at the time, because this is more me and Joe's era, when we were playing music. We remember too how real there's always that fear of is this online success going to match the real life success, and all this stuff. And then you've got bands like Stavesacre that deserve to be in the spot that they're in, but everybody's too busy looking in a different direction.
Well, they got old. At that point, there is a side of this music culture that we all don't want to embrace, which is, at that
expired.
point, yeah, you're just at that point. It's also embracing who's my fan base. Who's buying T-shirts? Who's buying records? There probably is one out of every 500 Devil Wears Prada kids that does buy a Stavesacre record or T-shirt.
Well, of course I know him. He's me.
Yeah. But that's what I mean. But you were the diamond in the rough.
Right.
10 years would pass.
That's sad. Yeah. It was now we're all depressed.
No, I love music nerd stuff. So.
Oh, yeah. I love being depressed. That's why I listen to this kind of music.
Now, Joe, are you going to Against the Silence?
I don't know if we're talking about that EP, Brian.
I just didn't know the timeline where we're at. But they did a reunion at Cornerstone that year. The Crucified played, Stavesacre played. They produced this EP. I think, still I'm looking at right now, Steve from Project and Jason Martin did the recording. Jeff Blue's back in the band, and it was amazing. I got the CD at Cornerstone. It was on regular rotation. It felt like the Stavesacre record I was missing, and that's all I'll say. I'll give it back to you.
No, that's fair. I mean, it's as far as EPs go, this is one that I remember being pretty stoked for because of how high energy it was in comparison to the last few releases, where it's like, when are we going to get on that uptick again? You know, when are we going to start, like, I don't want to use the word moshing, but when are we going to start, like, instead of just sitting back and appreciating the deepness and the intricacy of this or that, this was just a more in your face kind of gut punch sort of release. And for fans of the band from the first two records, this is essential listening.
Well, that's where you hear Jeff Blue, the primary songwriter, first two records, back in the band. Now,
right.
I don't know that Ryan didn't write the whole thing, but I just thought it was coincidence that here's Jeff and here's a killer record.
It's definitely the heavier experience that most, if not all, old school Stavesacre fans are looking for and have been looking for the past three records. I think this feels like an era of the band that I got early on, but the melodic sensibilities outweighed the extreme. And now I'm being reminded that this band hasn't always been that melodic, safe-sounding band that your mom and dad will let you listen to because they bought it in the Christian bookstore. This is one of those bands that is going to command your attention and energy if they ever put out another record, which is getting me excited for what's coming very soon.
The magnum opus record is what I like to call it.
2017, 1995.
It's my favorite record by them.
Yeah, 1995 is proof of how we as fans more or less dismantled the record industry over the past 10 to 15 years. We brought all of our favorite bands back from the dead in a lot of ways, because for whatever reason, like, because people want to talk about, and this is going to be a weird subject, but like, people want to talk about like how bad social media is and how bad, the digital age is and the message of misinformation. I'm sure all those people are right and all that good stuff, but there are positive sides to everything. And I think the biggest positive side of the internet as we know it, ignoring the fact that like three guys, well, until recently, had never been in the same room together, are sitting down having a conversation about this subject. And not only are we seeing and talking to each other as if we're all in the same room, but we're also talking about a band that honestly, if not for the way the world is now, would be gone.
Totally.
But suddenly all those dads, the dads that are the fan base, the older guys or whatever, they all have their social media and they're connecting with friends they haven't talked to in a while. And suddenly they're like, oh, wow, Stavesacre's still around. Or at least, even if a band's not around, we could get a hold of the people that are in it and let them know that people are actually interested in them doing something again, because that's the reason a lot of bands break up. It's not always because of drama or because of this or that or this or that. There just comes a point where it's not feasible to continue doing so unless you know that there's somebody out there that actually cares about it. And again, I'm not saying that's like what this record's about or what the theme is or anything like that, but it's just like, this band puts out their last full-length release in 2006. They come back 11 years later, stronger than ever.
It's the favorite record. When I got the record, I got the streaming, I think, from them first, and I heard the intro into The Dead Rejoice, gave me chills.
Yeah.
That's rare, but that was just, I was like, this is everything. And Mark comes in just right out the gates. You're talking about 1995. And that picture he paints is flawless.
Yeah. Yeah. This record is a record that somehow is able to please fans of any era of this band.
Totally.
And that's, it's not just lip service because I want Mark to come on the podcast, right? Like, it's not like, that's not what this record, or that's not what this discussion is. It's just that, like, I've listened to a lot of discographies, man, and very few groups of people that decide to play music together are able to create the feeling that Stavesacre creates on this record.
Totally.
You know, there's not a lot of people that are able to come back in a way that I don't know, man. I'm trying to make this big and complicated and sound important. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's just good vibes.
But they painted the picture we all wanted.
Yeah.
1995.
Yeah.
That's what we wanted.
Yeah.
I wanted my 1995 Stavesacre, and oh my gosh, I got it.
Oh yeah, you did.
And it was perfect in every way. You know, it was just, I mean, I'll be happy to make it grand for you. It was just so good. And the production on it. So it was funny because I asked Jeff, I'm like, this thing sounds so good. So the guy from the Deftones did this, like the same engineer. And Jeff's telling me, he goes, it's Paul Big. And I go, yeah, that's what I read. He goes, you know Paul. And I was like, I do? And he was like, he was in the Scaterd Few. And I was like, oh my gosh, I know Paul.
That's where the sound comes from.
No, but it just was that Paul's got a gift. And there's a reason he's done those Deftones records and won awards and whatever. Then Stavesacre raised enough money to do it right, which they did.
Yeah.
I feel like this record did for you, Bryan, what Inlet by Hum did for everybody.
Yeah, everyone.
I almost said Dan and I.
It was only for me. I got a message from the band said they only made that record for me. So,
And
subscribe.
I'll tell you what, going to Furnace Fest and Stavesacre played The Dead Rejoice was so good. I want to make sure I rub Dan's nose in that. Because it was.
Yeah, that's fine. It's okay.
You got pictures, right?
No, I should have. Well, I got pictures of me and the guys hanging out, but.
I mean, I watched a bunch of the YouTube videos.
When Jesse from the Satire and I drove through St. Louis on the way there, we both said, we should pull over, pick up Dan, and throw him in the trunk.
You should.
I would have helped you.
Yeah.
And then I would have jumped in the trunk and or tied myself to the hood of the car.
As long as I knew that it was you guys doing it, don't throw a bag over my head or anything, because then I'm going to try to escape and it's going to get weird, But yeah, this is, this was such a good record and such a great way to cap off a discography, because normally when I'm done listening to a discography, a little different with this band because I've listened to them for years, but I'm usually exhausted by the time I get to the end of it. And I have to admit that the last two releases were exhausting, not because they were bad, but because there's just a lot of like what could have beens associated with them. Because if the last two releases are what could have beens, this record is, this is what is, and this is what has been, And I don't know about you guys, but I take great comfort in that.
No, completely. I mean, I only have perfection to say about it. So
I think any record that throws me back to 1995 and reminds me how everyone used to approach their instrument differently. Watch any drummer from the 90s, now watch the early 2000s. If they didn't totally change up their setup, they changed the way they sat, they changed the way they approached the kit and the way that they wrote their beats. Guitars had different tones in the 90s. And anything that can take me back to remind me why I started playing music in the first place is 100% perfection for me. So I might not be as big of a fan as Bryan is, but I'm in on this one. This is the beginning and the end coming together to remind you that the band you love isn't the melodic bit you had in the middle, but we still have those records too.
Totally.
Final thoughts on Stavesacre. Dan.
I mean, just go out and listen to 1995. I think you should start there and work your way back with everything that we said in context. Everything that we said. So if you need to go back and take notes and timestamps, I understand. We will wait for you to do that now. All right, now that you're done doing that, I mean, honestly, this is a band that you could honestly start anywhere you want and find something to like. If you're a fan of deep, introspective rock music that, for lack of a better way of saying it, isn't completely up its own ass, because there's a lot of bands out there that do the deep, artful, introspective, deep lyrics thing, and it's all for fluff and it's all for some kind of weird credibility. This is actually my favorite Mark band, because of the honesty and the realness in the lyrics, but with his just poetic sort of approach, I don't think has really ever been matched by any other band that I listen to. So even though this style of music isn't always my go-to, I go back to it for that.
I think Stavesacre is one of the bands that everybody missed when they look back on the 90s and say, Hum was my favorite band. It's all about Tool. It's not about the 90s. It's about the early 2000s and some of the pop punk shit that everybody did. Stavesacre is the band you forgot to listen to. I know I forgot to listen to them because I've heard some of these records, but now I'm listening to the entire discography, and I feel like I found a gem, and that gem is mine and no one else's. But everybody that knows about Stavesacre loves this band because they're heavy, they're melodic, they're interesting, they're entertaining, and they don't really have a bad song. They don't really have a bad record. You could start at the beginning and you can jump to the end and it all fits together. You can listen to the melodic records in the middle and they all fit together. Then you'll find the pieces of everything that fit together, and Stavesacre will be one of your favorite bands. So you need to listen to Stavesacre. Bryan Gray, final thoughts on Stavesacre, man.
Well, I got to go to Furnace Fest and see them play.
Come on, man.
And I will say, I definitely had an emotional experience. Just Mark walking out, commanding the stage, singing songs like Gold and Silver, At the Moment, Threshold, doing the Dead Rejoice from 1995. I mean, they're one of my favorite bands, and I stand by that. And even the bad records are great, and the great records are even better.
What's your album of the week, Brian?
Well, I mean, I've been listening to Stavesacre for you guys, but
do it for the show. Yeah.
Do it for the show, I know.
I can just put 1995 down if you'd like.
No, I've been listening to whatever, I don't remember what it's called, The Last at the Drive-In.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. I just can't pronounce the name of the record. That's who we should talk about At the Drive-In sometime.
I like At the Drive-In.
I same.
But the Inter Alia, that's the one I was listening to this, rounding out the week.
Dan, what about you?
Well, I've actually been listening to an EP as a bit of a palate cleanser. I had to get back into my listening to growly music, as you put it. So I've been listening to the Color of Bone EP by a band called Violent Life, Violent Death. I love that band. If you hear the vocals in that band, you'll know why I like that band a lot. So I'll let you go listen to it and connect the dots yourself. But yeah, check that out. It's an EP. I'm recommending an EP. So all you guys out there that are like, dude, Dan hates EPs. He doesn't even know what EPs are. If he had just listened to this EP, he would have seen the band in a totally new light. And I listen to EPs, and you guys don't know this, but when I do my listen throughs for these albums and for these bands, even if we don't talk about the EPs, I still listen to them as part of my thing. And so if an EP does stand out to me, we will talk about it, much as we did this evening. So bear that in mind. We're not anti EPs over here. We only have so much time.
I was able to bring up the Stavesacre EP, so
Brian gets special privileges. It's just
Well, Brian's here. Sam is not. I wish he was, so I could tell him that my album of the week was Sin Disease by the Scaterd Few.
Nice.
Kill the
Beautiful.
Sarks, man, and hang them from the rafters.
Bryan Gray, thank you so much, man, for coming on. I love talking to you. I always, it's funny to me a lot of the times at night whenever I've got like all these big thoughts that I've got to get out, and you're the only person awake, to read my message. It'll be like 2:30, 3 o'clock, and I bet both of us are like looking at the clock being like, when does this guy go to bed? The answer is never.
No, I love it. I'm at work, so sounds great.
But guys, definitely keep an eye out on this 21 in 21 that's not actually in 21 that's coming out.
2021.
Yeah, it's gonna be great. It's gonna be great, and not just because Joe and I will have a small piece of it, or be on a small piece of it, and definitely get that Satire. Do not sleep on the Satire. I know that the release schedule isn't always as consistent as you'd get with other bands, but this band is awesome, and just trust me on this. If you haven't listened to any of the singles they released, you need to. It's really good, and we appreciate Bryan so much for coming on the show, and we'll probably do it again when we all collectively have a band that we all want to talk about.
Well, thanks for having me. It's really, I don't take it for granted. I think what you guys do is really awesome.
Please tell me why you guys haven't covered Kill the Sarks yet.
Because I can't play it.
Take us out, DFT.
If you guys have been listening to this podcast and you want to reach out to us in any way, shape, or form, you can do that in a lot of ways. You can send us an email at danandjoeshow@gmail.com, or you can message us on Facebook at facebook.com/discography discussion. You can also find us on Twitter at discussmetal. You can find us on Instagram at discussmetal. You can find us on YouTube at discussmetaldan. Drop a line. Let us know how we're doing, or leave us a review somewhere. We want to hear from you guys. Thank you so much for checking out this podcast. I can't wait for you guys to hear what we have in store for you in 2022. If you would like to be a supporter of the podcast financially, you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/discussmetal. If you would like to support the podcast financially through sponsorship, if you have a business or a band or something you would like us to shout out or otherwise promote for you in some way, hit us up at danandjoeshow@gmail.com. Let us know what you got, and we will let you know what we've got.
And on that note, this has been episode 257 of Discography Discussion. Thank you for listening. You can like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at Discuss Metal. Subscribe to our podcast everywhere you listen to podcasts, including Google Play, Apple Podcasts, and Stitcher. Visit discussmetal.com for all things discography discussion. And please send questions and comments to danandjoeshow@gmail.com. If you are not a patron, you can become one at patreon.com/discussmetal. We have some sweet perks.
Hey, Joe, can I borrow some money?
$1 a month gets you into that exclusive album review feed.
Right.